Kuphina kuphi emakhaya amadolobheni azokuplasta khona sesingenile ke thina emavulandlela sawubona ke mbukeleni warm welcome to this week's edition of Yilungelo Lakho. It's your right silethela ke lohlelo lapha kuhamba phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure mina ke ngisimpiwe Ngongwane bekunene. On our focus today, allegations of misconduct in the management of sectional title schemes has prompted a nationwide campaign aimed at rooting out misconduct attributed to some unscrupulous body corporates. Well, as popular as sectional scheme living may be, one thing is certain. It is fraught with all sorts of disputes. Topping the list is the financial mismanagement and misgovernance. Kukhuluma kabandi ke ngemkhankaso weqeza ke tinkinga ke ekuphathweni kwetimali naletinye tinhlelo tetindzawo tema complex asesibukele kumcatululi wetinkinga takhona Adv Boyce Mkhize lo ke Ombudsman for Community Schemes. Mkhize khabazela sakumule ehlelweni sawubona baba.
Salbana but
good to have you on the show always.
As always, thank you so much for having us.
Siyabonga Mkhize. Yeah, so ukhona yini umthetho lo wengamela ke kuphathwa kwema complex. Nangabe ukhona ke lo mthetho loyo umthetho wahulumende. Is it a national law? Noma ke umthetho nje wema complex or a private law that simply governs a particular community scheme?
Yes, there is a national law. It's the Sectional Schemes Titles Management Act, STSMA in short. It basically regulates communal living in the schemes and body corporates, homeowners associations and related issues. But also tied to that and coupled to that, there is the Community Schemes Ombud Services Act, which is the act that gives rise to the service that I represent as the Chief Ombud. And those two pieces of legislation, together with their subordinate regulations, then provide a framework for how to govern, to behave, and to manage issues and affairs pertaining to the schemes. So it's not just a private interpretation issue. And over and above that, we also issue what we call practice directives as the CISOs to govern the conduct and the operations, drawing from the regulations, from the Act, the two acts that I've mentioned.
Okay. Yeah. So lo mthetho ke ungamela ke onke ama schemes noma ke there's different categories of a scheme.
Ungamela wonke ama scheme akhona. Uyazi ama schemes ahlukahlukene ngezigaba ezahlukene. So you would have the homeowners associations, you would have the retirement villages, you would have the normal body corporate arrangements, etc., and sectional schemes. Wherever there is communal living and shared living, in terms of communal spaces that are common property and a piece that is belonging to a particular member, then in those arrangements, the laws that I've made reference to would apply equally. So the general thrust of the laws, in fact, applies to all types of these schemes in the main, with slight variations here and there, but essentially the essence of it is that it would apply to all the schemes here.
Okay, asasikhuluma ke ngetinkinga ke bahlali bakuma complex labaye badibane nato, especially kuma body corporate noma ke generally kuma community schemes.
Well, the major problem.
Like obviously,
yeah. So while the growing and escalating issue at this stage of concern to us as the Ombud Service has to do with the issues of governance, good corporate governance for the schemes, how those that are entrusted with the responsibility to govern the schemes are in fact somehow mishandling, mismanaging, and not appropriately providing for good governance principles in these issues. And there are varied examples and incidents that we've come across that lend themselves to disputes that end up with us, so we have to intervene and then resolve those particular disputes. So ngabafshane nje ziningi izinkinga esihlangabezana nazo abantu abaziletha kithi ngenxa yokuthi laba bengamele lama schemes lawo abaphathi umsebenzi ngendlela efanelekile. Ngokomthetho wama Companies Companies Act, umuntu owengamele umsebenzi wokuphatha ischeme unikezwa what is called a fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah.
And that fiduciary responsibility always means that you need to act in the best interest of the scheme, shunning things like self-interest, conflict of interest, making sure that there's transparency, there's adequate communication, there's participation and involvement of those that are governed by that framework.
Now, conflict of interest, conflict of interest between who?
Well, so the schemes generally would appoint, the body corporates would appoint what we call a board of trustees.
Okay.
So the trustees act almost like the executive of the scheme. They govern the affairs in terms of the day-to-day operations of the scheme. They look after maintenance issues of the scheme, the insurance upkeep, the security of the estate, the issue of maintenance of the rules of the scheme, etc. So their responsibility is to manage those things in a way that is free from any bias, free from any conflict. So when we talk about conflict of interest, there are sometimes instances where those that are entrusted with the responsibility to manage the affairs of the scheme would in fact overstep the boundaries by introducing their own people or their own service providers to render services to the scheme. And so in that way, they're actually deriving a benefit financially from those kind of activities. And so there isn't a clear demarcation between their own interests and the interests of the scheme. And the contracts get to be renewed, extended indefinitely, and there's no accountability in terms of sometimes even the level of service that gets to be provided. Yes. And all of those issues would essentially constitute a conflict of interest. And that's why we're saying there needs to be some level of transparency as well as accountability in terms of the processes through which those service providers, for example, are appointed. We speak about issues of mandatory rotation. Of course, it's not law, as it were, in terms of the auditors that audit the books.
Right.
But there needs to be some regular, rotation so that there isn't an affinity that gets to be developed between the auditors and those that are being audited. And we've seen the type of incidents that happen when there is that close relationship between auditors and the auditee. So we talk about those things as part of the principles for enhancing good corporate governance within the scheme environment.
So as the Office of the Ombudsman, do they involve the delivery of services by the various body corporates, or do you forget imali?
Kuningi okufaka indaba zemali nokuthi izimali zisetshenziswa kanjani.
Yeah.
Izimali sometimes asetshenziswa ngendlela efanelekile.
Yeah.
Uthola ukuthi ayikho accountability ngokuthi imali isetshenziswa kanjani. So sometimes there are special levies that are imposed to the people that are residents within the scheme without adequate and proper consultation, without them being involved in the need for the imposition of those special levies. And of course, they get to be imposed inconsistent with the practice directives that we've issued around these issues, because there must be a unanimous resolution with regards to those issues. So in the absence of that, these things then tend to be abused. And the money sometimes, some of the schemes would not necessarily operate adequate budgets or appropriate budgets. They would overextend themselves. Sometimes they would even contract and get themselves, the scheme, in fact, encumbered in debts without member involvement. And sometimes you find that this may be actuated by some ulterior motives. So these are the type of issues that we're trying to unravel and to deal with, so that there is more accountability and transparency around how monies are in fact expended on behalf of the members of the scheme. It's quite a big issue at the moment, and sometimes there's issues of people not actually wanting to change and exchange information And we've seen some of the schemes where they were struggling with regards to records, the books, in terms of how money was applied. Bank statements that are not being provided.
Okay.
And all of those things because there's a fear that some of the transactions may not be properly authorized. Or
please hold your thought. Yeah, please hold your thought right there. We'll continue with that point and that discussion in a moment. Please do stay with us. Yilungelo Lakho namhlanje sikhuluma ke nge-misgovernance of sectional title schemes. Noma ke ukukhwabanisa kwetimali ikakhulukati kuma complex ke nathi tonke ke tinkinga labahlali boma complex labadibana nato. Leli lungelo lakho siyabuya khona nyalo. So umukela futhi mbukele tincingo thethu sethivuliwe ukuthi ke nawe ungaba ingcenye yale nkulumo yethu namhla ungashayela icingo khona manje ku 0117140669 noma ke ku 0117140670. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za. ungasithola futhi ku Facebook na ku Twitter. Namhla ke sikhuluma ke nge-unfairness, nge-malfeasance noma ke kukhwabanisa kwetimali kuma complex noma ke tinkinga ke thide bahlali bama complex labadibana nato especially ke kuma body corporate. Adv Mkhize, Kabazela, I want us to talk about some of the issues. You've just highlighted some of the issues, but those issues, when you intervene in a particular body corporate or community scheme, are they only confined to timali, noma just about any other issue? I'm going to make an example. Kona ge bahlali laba complain ukuthi ema body corporate noma ge imithetho yakhona they are not reasonable. Kuthi ke they are not allowed to bring visitors at certain times. Noma ge kunema limit yetivakashi kumele ukuthi batilethe kula complex ke around certain times. Kuthi ke do you intervene in those kind of matters?
Oh, kakhulu. Into ebalekile ukuthi imithetho ekhishwayo kuma body corporate kufanele kube imithetho okuvunyelwana ngayo. This is communal living. Abantu bahlala ndawonye. Into ebalekile esiyipromotayo njengesisoso ukuthi kufanele abantu bahlale ngokuzwana. Kube nokuthula endaweni lapha abahlala khona.
Okay.
So as a result siyesithanda ukuthi nemithetho le abayidlulisayo noma abayiphasisayo esingathi nje ama rules of the schemes kufanele kube imithetho okuboniswane ngayo kuqala nawo wonke amalunga aleyo body corporate. Amalunga kufanele avumelane naleyo mthetho. Imithetho le yenziwayo kufanele futhi ibe imithetho esingathi ngesingisi they are reasonable. In other words, they will stand the scrutiny also of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, if you establish the rules that are inconsistent with the Bill of Rights or inconsistent with the frameworks that we provide in terms of reasonableness, those rules then are bound to be declared invalid and to be discarded. So, abantu, umuntu nomuntu ohlalayo ku-estate is bound by the rules of that estate. So, uma ngibound mina imithetho yale ndawo engihlala kuyona, nginalo ilungelo lokuthi ngi-approach isisource, Community Schemes Ombud Service. Ngithi kubo ngicela ningixazululele nansi inkinga ngoba asisazwananga la ne-body corporate noma ne-board of trustees ngenxa yokuthi umthetho abawubekile angihambisani nawo noma lo mthetho awuhambisani nesimo okufanele ngabe sisinikeziwe njengabahlali bale ndawo. So in other words, individuals are well within their rights to also challenge the efficacy and the effectiveness or the reasonableness of the rules, and would intervene even under those circumstances and provide appropriate frameworks for that.
Okay, short village mina as an individual ombudsman ingakhona ke ukucatulula le nkinga yami, not necessarily ukuthi kumele sibe igroup.
You don't need to be a group.
Okay.
Okay. So as an individual, because you've got individual rights, the fact that you've got a stand there and you've got your own portion of the levees and you are paying levees, etc., all of that entitles you to have a right. You have a right even to call for a special general meeting of everyone within the estate to come and discuss issues of common interest. Of course, subject to certain requirements in terms of percentage, quorum, and all of those kind of things. So, ungakwazi nokuthi ucela abantu enihlanganisana nabo ukuthi nize emhlanganweni kuzokhulunywa kudingidwe izindaba zaleyo estate. Amanye ama rules, for example, they have to deal with issues zokuthi izilwane akufanele zigcinwe la, you know. And sometimes lawa rules lawa, they become so overextended ngalendlela ukuthi in certain instances uthola ukuthi kunomuntu who is, for example, umuntu ongaboni, who is blind, and who needs a guide dog,
yeah,
you know.
guide dog.
Now, when they bring a guide dog and then it now conflicts with the rules, and there hasn't been any exception that is provided for that, then it becomes problematic. So that individual can, in fact, take issue with the fairness, reasonableness of that rule and bring it up with the CISOs. Of course, if the body corporate and the Board of Trustees don't see light in amending or adjusting that rule to accommodate the individual concerned.
So umthetho doesn't it give too much power to isisos ukuthi ingakhona ku-overrula umthetho loshaywe ingileyo body corporate leyo? You just made a good example of nangabe ukhona kumhlali longaboni kahle emehlweni losebenzisa i-guide dog. Kuthi vele umthetho uthi no pets allowed because of umsindvo noma ke just any other issue involving ama-pets. Kepha ke naye ke seyafika isisos seyawuchitha lo mthetho loyo.
Well, the CISOS really stands there as a guardian and a regulator to ensure that there is fairness that prevails, that the individual rights are respected. But of course, in promoting the individual protection of the rights, the CISOS does not do that willy-nilly or in a manner that disregards what the appropriate limitations would be.
Okay.
Now, for example, kumthetho sisekelo wezwe, i-constitution of the country, kukhona lokho esithi limitation clause. So ngaba na amalungelo akho, kodwa amalungelo akho kufinyelela la okufanele amiswe khona uma ezothikazisa omunye umuntu olandelayo. So in other words, your freedom is as good as up to the end of your nose. Once it extends to the nose of the other person, then there is a problem. So for that reason, Constitution, Section 36, recognizes limitation of rights. So CISOS would operate almost as that regulator to regulate the temperature in relation to limitations that may have to be imposed in the greater interest of everyone that lives within the scheme. So we provide frameworks that help everyone in an impartial manner, in a manner that basically upholds peaceful coexistence within their states.
Okay. So isisos yawe ngamela ini ema complex noma ke lama ima community scheme if lengalenzela umthetho, like community schemes that do not necessarily comply with the law, can the CISOs come in noma ke CISOs only acts nangabe khona ki complaint that has been leveled against that particular body corporate?
Well, in terms of our law, asikwazi ukuvele singenelele odabeni olungalethwanga kithi.
Okay.
Kodwa into esiyenzayo njengamanje ukwenza into esingayibiza ngokuthi proactive verification, proactive review of the practices within the schemes. How do we do this? The law, the CISOS Act, allows us to have inspection or inspectors to conduct enforcement compliances. Now, that basically simply means that we are able to look into your processes as a scheme and determine the areas of non-compliance and issue orders that might, in fact, force you to actually comply with the law. So we have not been too active with regards to that proactive area, but we are now instituting that in a much more aggressive way because we realize that there isn't much that happens in the form of sometimes people knowing what their rights are.
Yes.
And therefore we need to bring this to the awareness of people and the schemes and scheme managers, etc., so that they are aware of the limitations and the issues of governance that might be at play.
Okay, asishiye lapho ke Mkhize. Let's now take another break. Hlala kanye nathi ke ungasanyakati siyabuya. Leli Yilungelo Lakho, don't go away. Welcome back Mbukele. Khumbula ukuthi nawe ungaba ingcenye lenkulumo yethu namhlanje ukuthi ushare licingo ku 0117140669 noma ke 0117140670 Ungasithumela futhi ne-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za. Ungasithumela futhi ku Facebook. Namhla ke sina Advocate Boyce Mkhize, National Ombudsman Community Schemes. Sikhuluma ke ngetinkinga bahlali kuma complex noma ke in any community scheme lebadibana nato nekuthi ke athina amalungelo akho nekuthi ke netinkinga lethi ungacatulula kanjani nekuthi ke futhi ke lehhovisi le-ombuds lingacatulula kanjani leyo nkinga leyo. Now Mkhize, before we take our first call, I just want you to talk about the nationwide campaign that iSISOS is embarking on.
Okay, into esesi-decide ukuthi sizoyenza ngoba umthetho uyasigunyaza ukuthi senze sure ukuthi kune compliance kulama schemes nama frameworks lawa eswa administerayo. So we intensifying on our Inspectorate, which is our Inspectorate division.
Yeah.
So our compliance officers are going to have more teeth. They're going to be going out. They've started already, to make sure that there is compliance with the governance frameworks within the schemes.
Okay.
In addition, we have started on a proactive stance to also attend some of the AGMs, annual general meetings or special general meetings of some of these volatile areas, where there are contested issues. And where governance direction is required. Ngiceda kuhambe ukuvakashela enye sama schemes kuma SGMs akhona eThekwini in the past few weeks. La khona besizama ukuxazulula sikhombise umhlahlandlela ukuthi kuhanjwa kanjani uma kuphathwa izinto ze-administration of a scheme. So these are part of the proactive stances esiwathathayo. The third thing that we are embarking on is we're going to have a national indaba, where we are going to be inviting all the role players, the schemes managers, the managing agents, executive managing agents, your trustees, and your associations in this area, to actually come and discuss the growing concerns around governance of the scheme, so that we increase and enhance transparency, effective communication, effective administration, and efficiency just in the running of the schemes. So this is part of what we're looking at in the near future.
Effective administration is one of the key issues and has been a thorny issue for so many community schemes, and I want us to delve deeper in that. But before we do that, let's take our first caller. Sinasilo, ulapha kepitole segumukele hlele nsawubona.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, how are you, sir?
I'm well, man. I just want to ask a question regarding the turnaround time for the resolution of the dispute if one has lodged a complaint with a body corporate. And number two, if, for instance, the complaint is being investigated and the Community Ombudsman has made some investigation and recommendation. So is the recommendation binding? That's all I want to know. The turnaround time for the resolution and the recommendation as well, whether they're binding or not.
Okay. Silo, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your call. Advocate.
Yeah, the adjudication order that we issue has got the status equivalent to that of the High Court order. So it can only be reversed or set aside by a High Court judge. So in terms of the weight that attaches to that, in fact, it is also enforceable by law in terms of the statutory provisions. So that is the first thing. The turnaround time in terms of the dispute resolution, these things go through a three-stage approach. The assessment stage, we normally allocate about no more than 30 days for that process. Then there's conciliation process that we always encourage and promote, so that parties can try to find each other without the other feeling that they are a loser or the other feeling they're a winner. So try and resolve the things amicably. If that fails, we then go into the adjudication stage, which is the final stage. The adjudication stage, we normally allocate from the start of the process to the end a period of no more than 90 days. So that's the kind of timeline that we're looking at. Of course, we have been significantly reducing the turnaround times with regards to this, because our adjudicators are becoming more and more efficient and much more effective.
So we are about to see the recommendations, are they binding?
Yes,
do they have a legal standing?
Yes, they're binding. That's the point I started off to say, that they actually have the weight and the equivalence of a High Court judgment, High Court order. So they can only be set aside through an appeal process in the High Court.
Now back to the campaigns. Back to the campaigns. What's the objective of those campaigns? Highlight
into ebaluleke kakhulu ukuthi sithola ama complaints amaningi kubantu who are concerned about how things are being run kuma schemes.
Yes.
Some of the people abahlala kulama schemes, they pay levies, but they feel that they are suppressed, that their rights cannot actually be fully exercised, that they can't air their views with regards to how the scheme ought to be governed. So uthola ukuthi kunento yokuthi ama decisions athathwa abantu abathizeni and bona they are not involved. So we're increasing, or we're trying to raise a message and awareness about greater involvement of participants and members of the body corporate. Number two, we are saying kufanele kube khona lokho abathi ngesilungu i-transparency. Ngamanye amazwi kufanele izinto ezithathwayo izinqumo ezithathwayo kubonakala ukuthi zisukaphi kungezani, and they are not also for an ulterior or illicit purpose, as it were. The third thing is we're trying to enhance capacity issues around understanding the issue of record keeping.
Yes.
Because sometimes our resolutions are manipulated in a way that, in fact, might work against the members.
Yes.
Because you find that there are some unscrupulous trustees sometimes who have got illicit motives, and they change the minutes and the record. So the record keeping becomes important. So we want to highlight those things. We want to deal with the issues of how the monies are in fact managed and how the monies are being expended, that there is supporting documentation, there is transparent procurement processes, that there is consultative processes around the determination of the budgets. What is it that is good for the good of the scheme? So all of these things are things that are quite critical in the running and in the governance of the scheme, and of course the member participation. One of the issues that are becoming increasingly an issue, uthola ukuthi kufanele kukhethwe ama trustees. Lama trustees lawa akade khona awafuna ukuphuma somehow, because sekumnandi la kulenda, you know. And uma engafuna ukuphuma uthola ukuthi sometimes there is a general meeting or a special general meeting elects other people. Uma laba basha befika, laba badala bafuna ukuphuma or abafuna ukusharisha information ukuthi kwenzakaleni ngezincwadi, ama login details for the bank accounts of the scheme. So there is resistance kunodontsiswana. As a result, ama schemes sometimes they fall into serious arrears, they can't service their obligations, etc., etc. So these are part of the issues that create the conundrum around the management and the governance of the scheme. And we're saying there is no reason why, as a member of the scheme, you shouldn't assert your rights in terms of saying, the record says, we have elected these trustees, you are no longer a trustee, you get out.
Yes.
Sometimes one of the issues we're dealing with right now is the issue of a managing agent who is basically resisting to come out because they have been terminated, but because they have an interest in continuing in that particular scheme, they're now trying to resist the issue around who is the properly elected trustee.
Okay.
So you see, it gets convoluted, you know, in that way. So we're trying to deal with those issues in a way that's transparent, that is fair, that is reasonable, so that people know exactly what to expect in terms of proper governance, you know, in the schemes.
Okay, all right. Asishiyile lapho ke Mkhize Mkhabazela. Bukela sesithathe linye likhefu ke. Do join us after this break. Yilungelo Lakho. Don't you move an inch. To take part in today's discussion, please call our participation line 0117140669 or 0117140670. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za or interact with us on our Facebook page. Now, Mkhize Mkhabazela, I wanted to talk about the legality or illegality of some of the community schemes. Kuthi-ke nakuthiwa ke i-community scheme ayikho emthethweni kusuke sekunjani? Kusuke ingakendi ini kuze kuthiwe ke ayikho emthethweni?
The community scheme, onke ama-community scheme in South Africa, fanele proclaim. In other words, they must be gazetted appropriately, they must be registered with the deeds office. So there's a long, lengthy process for that with the deeds office, the submission of the sketches and the plans and all of those things, and there must be an approval process for that to be proclaimed as a scheme.
Okay.
So it's a legal process. The CSOS also gets involved in that because we then need to actually issue out a consent to the proclamation of that. The net effect of it, or the corollary to that, is that those schemes ought also to be registered with the CSOS. Because in terms of the CSOS Act, Section 59 obliges every scheme that exists in South Africa to be registered with the CSOS. Yes, that's the first step. So if you're not registered with the CSOS, number one, that's illegality, number one.
Yes.
So we're saying all schemes, we are in fact in a campaign right now where there are foot soldiers that are conducting physical verifications. And we're urging all the schemes that are not on the registers yet to come up front and make sure they cooperate. And we have got now a digitized process to automate this thing, and you can register online without having to visit any of the CSOS offices. So it's become easier, efficient, etc. So the issue is you can check with the deeds office as well in terms of the registration of your scheme. And if it is gazetted, is proclaimed as such, then there's no problem. The scheme is proper and is properly registered.
ISISOS yona inawo emandla ekuvala i-community scheme lengekho emthethweni?
Well, our powers don't extend that far. All that the law says is that if you're not registered with the CSOS and consequently not contributing to the levies, that ought to be paid as part of the levies that we charge the schemes, you are in fact breaking the law, and in fact it is a criminal offense. So we can take action on the basis of criminal charges against that particular individual or individuals that are perpetrating a scheme in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So bahlale ke babona kanjani ukuthi le scheme lesi sisemthethweni noma cha?
Into abangayenza ukuthi bathintane nathi esisos ukuchecka ukuthi le scheme si-registered noma cha.
Oh, okay.
Because enye into eyenzakalayo again around governance issues, uthola ukuthi izscheme lezi they collect monies from our members, but kokhana imali there's a line ebhalwe CSOS levy in your levy schedule. Uma abantu be notice. So there's a line that's written CSOS levy. That CSOS levy is supposed to be taken from the members and paid directly to CSOS without any deduction. All right. Now uthola ukuthi kunama scheme athatha leyo mali kuma members scheme, leyo mali ingafinyeleli ku CSOS. Now that's criminal. So our members also have got a right ukuthi abuze athola ama statement. Athi sicela ukubona statement esikhombisa i-contribution yethu kwa-CSOS nokuthi we are in good and regular standing.
Okay.
So they've got that right, and the bank statements, they've got a right to see what's exactly happening as mali zabo.
So nangabe ke kuyatfolakala ukuthi ke leyo particular community scheme beyisolo isebenzisa imali ngalongekho emthethweni noma ke idlabathisa imali noma ke ikhwabanisa imali, and then kwaphuma ke sinqumo senkantolo noma ke se Ombudsman's office, what then happens to that money? Le mali ibuyela kubahlali noma iya kule body corporate?
Uma i-recovery leyo mali kumele ibuyele esikhwameni se-body corporate. Okay. Ama trustees mhlawumbe akesibekise or managing agent or whoever that may actually be guilty of squandering the funds that belong to the body corporate, right. Then that particular individual or individuals would then be liable to return those monies, if not voluntarily through forced civil action in a court of law. But also over and above that, the law authorizes that where money has been taken unlawfully, it constitutes theft or fraud, and therefore that becomes a criminal offense. So under those circumstances, any member of the scheme or members of the scheme can in fact press charges criminally against those that are involved or implicated in the wrongdoing. Yes.
Right. Kuba na umkhutshana ke ukuthi managing agents kanye ke nama trustees ahlangene ngetulu njengenhliza mfuku noma ke collusion between managing agents and as well as these trustees. What's your comment ke kuloko?
We find that in some instances that is true, where some of the managing agents sometimes collude with the trustees, and that collusion becomes a very unhealthy relationship for the scheme, in the sense that you're bound to find instances of conflict of interest there, you're bound to find issues of self-serving, and usually it is commercially driven. So if we keep you here as managing agents, you can actually manage the affairs of the scheme in a manner that might hide certain information from the members that are supposed to receive truthful, complete, and adequate information, in relation to those issues. Or you might find also that there is some kind of illicit sharing of the proceeds of the monies that operate, and the issue I raised earlier on around conflict of interest also does become a reality. So we found that there are certain instances where the relationship is one that can be regarded as the unhealthy one and not desirable, because these parties then tend to club together in a manner that is not in the best interest of the scheme. So our overriding consideration always ukuthi uma kwenziwa noma yini kufanele ama members scheme ahlale ethola the best benefit of the management interventions by any of the parties that are involved.
Kulena ke inhlangano lekuthiwa NAMA noma ke inhlangano lengamele managing agents. Le inhlangano leyo ke idlala nzima yini kumsebenzi wayo? INAMA, we work with them quite closely. In fact, we have regular meetings with them because they represent quite a significant number of managing agents in the industry. Yes.
And they are a voluntary association, not a statutory organization. So members, managing agents, will subscribe and become members of that particular organization, and it looks after the interests of the managing agents. And our approach has always been, it is important to keep them as partners to the CISOs for purposes of collaborating in institutionalizing and engendering good practices in terms of governance. And that's that's the nature of the relationship that we keep with them. But when it comes to the regulation authority, that regulation authority cannot be confused.
Okay.
It resides only with the regulator that's appointed in law, and that's the CISOs.
Okay. All right. Advovo. All right, let's now take our final break. Asasihlangane ke nasibuya etitolo leli Yilungelo Lakho ungasanyakati. Sakumola futhi ke mbukele siyachubeka nenzaba yethu namhla ke ngema community schemes noma ke ma complex lapho uhlala khona ukuthi ke yini inkinga lo udibane nato nekuthi ke malungelo akho athini nekuthi ke kumele kuye kuphi nangabe ke so uthole nokuhishana kanye wena ne body corporate yakho sinaye ke Mkhize khabazele lapha siyathi ke ukuthi ke ma services esisos amahala kepha ke the length of time it takes to resolve a dispute ungathola ukuthi ke in the long run iyay affecta umhlali noma ke i-resident quite adversely, right?
Sure. And that's why we have put so much effort in accelerating the turnaround times. We have added the numbers of adjudicators to basically fast track the resolution of the complaints. We've added the number of conciliators to fast track the process, etc. And our turnaround times have significantly reduced. We came from a backlog of in excess of 2,000 matters in times past, and that had been backlog accumulated over years. We managed to clear that as at the end of the last financial year. And as I speak now, we in fact have processed over 10,600 matters this financial year. So we are really moving quite swiftly in improving the turnaround time. Some of them, we would say, for example, we've got 90 days within which to finalize an adjudication process. Some of them get finalized in a matter of 30 days instead of 90 days these days, simply because of the attention we're giving to it. But of course, there's also another procedure we've introduced for matters that can't wait due to urgency, where, for example, imminent danger might happen, or there might be some damage that might be caused if there isn't an immediate resolution to the matter. So we do provide for an expedited line where circumstances dictate that we should actually handle the matter on an urgent basis. So there's a special application for it, and we get to give it the priority that it needs based on the requirements that are presented before us.
So what's the common thread in these matters?
Well, the biggest issue that we're confronted with now, which is why we are standing up to look into it, is the whole issue around governance of schemes. When you analyze the nature and the type of the complaints, you realize that, in fact, it has to do with how schemes are not being properly governed. Issues around access to information, that's part of the problems and disputes we're getting. Issues around the improper, invalid resolutions in terms of the AGMs and the SGMs, issues of lack of quorum, issues of lack of access to the books and the records of the scheme, issues of levies that are being imposed without adequate consultation and necessary resolutions. And of course, most of the complaints also have to do with the issue of the outstanding levies. People are defaulting. There's legal action that gets taken. In fact, in the previous installment of this very program, we dealt with that issue of the levies that are accumulating and interest upon interest that gets imposed, and the sharks that come in, debt collectors, etc., and all of those things. So it becomes another issue that is a sore point that's emerging and that we're watching. And of course, the issue around the rules and the reasonableness of the rules. These are some of the issues that, in fact, keep us busy.
Ngoba you just mentioned defaulting on ema-levies. Kuthi-ke ngiyathi lutho sike sayikhuluma-ke ngaphambilini lenza ema-levies leyo, nekuthi-ke uthola ukuthi umuntu sothola ukuthi-ke indlu yakhe sebayayithatha noma-ke yadliwa idliwa libhange as a result of that. Can isi-source intervene kuloko noma-ke it's an ambit of another organization?
Uma indlu idliwa ibhange, ibhange liye lisebenzise umthetho. And umthetho wakhona uma indaba ihamba ngokodaba lwenkantolo, isisosa ayikwazi ukungenelela lapho. Into esesiyikhuthaza ukuthi abantu bangahlali kuze amanzi angene endlini. Uma uthola amasamanisi ukuthi nasi isikweletu usingenile kufanele usebenze, kufanele usukumele phezulu leyo ndaba, ukwazi ukubona nabameli uma bengakusiza, noma uzame ukuyoxoxisana nabanikazi be-corporate, be-body corporate, ukuthi hey, nginenkinga la, nginenkinga eso ngicela ukunegotiate senze kanje ukuze ngikwazi ukuthi indlu yakho ingadliwa, ngoba abantu balahlekelwe izindlu ngayo le ndaba yokuthi umuntu ukweleta amalevi. Uthola ukuthi sekutholakala i-court order, sekune-attachment, indlu idliwe, iyadayiswa, umuntu akasenandlu, akasenalutho, uphumile kuphelile kanjalo. And sometimes lezi zindlu zidayiswa ngotiki, imali engathi shu, kodwa uthola ukuthi into kade ikweleta ibincane. So all of those things are things that we're saying members of the schemes must take up quite actively.
Ngoba ke lenye inkinga lebaye badibane nayo inkinga ye-financial mismanagement. Ngiyathi lutho sikhulumile ke ngayo ukuthi nakuthiwa ke kune-financial mismanagement by the trustees or the body corporate, kusuke kuthiwa ke are they deliberately mismanaging the finances? Noma ke ayikho le understanding of how a body corporate or a community scheme is managed when it comes to the finances.
Okunye kwenziwa ngamabomu ngoba imali phela kuthiwa lithezo limanzi. So abantu uthola ukuthi bafuna ukuzisiza la esikhwameni se-body corporate for their own ends. So that's the one category. Abanye uthola ukuthi they do these things with good intentions, but in fact without following the necessary procedures for authorization, you know. So that also still becomes a problem. So awukwazi ukusebenzisa imali kungabudgetwanga kungavunyelwananga ngebudget namalunga alapho nokuthi le mali izosetshenziswa kanjani, ama priorities yini. Ake ngibekise nje ukuthi i-estate mhlawumbe there is a big crack on the roads and whatever which are posing imminent danger. But when I prioritize cutting off a tree that is really not posing a danger.
Yes.
You know, so those are the things that sometimes would create problems. And you prioritize you've got a relationship with the tree fella.
Yes.
You know, and not necessarily because you've got good interests of the scheme at heart. So these are the things that come at play around the issues of mismanagement. And the others are just straight down thuggery and criminality and fraud, where people access these funds for their own selfish ends, and that's a criminal matter, and the police must be involved.
Uma ngabe ke sesayigqogqotela uhlelo nangabe ke ngivase ngishayeleke esakeni ibody corporate ngiyakuphi ama office enu are they countrywide noma ke there's one central office uphinde usinike inombolo then futhi
ama office ethu they are countrywide. So sine office elikhulu elisePitori, sihlangene lapho eoffice lasePitori neoffice laseGauteng, elibhekelele indawo zaseLimpopo Northwest, sibe neoffice elise-Cape Town, elibhekelele Eastern Cape, Western Cape, kanye ne-Northern Cape. Sine-satellite office esiyivulayo eGeorge, enye ePort Elizabeth, eGqeberha, isivuliwe. Sinelinye office elise-KZN eThekwini, libhekelele eMpumalanga, libhekelele ne-Free State. Nakhona we are busy looking into expanding into other territories. So people can in fact access us. The best way is to go to our website, which is www.csos.org.za, and there they will find our contact details, they'll find our info email. That's the best way of communicating with us, or they can then call through our call center, and they'll get some assistance.
All right. Mkhize Kabazela, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kwanyalo mbukeli ke sasifikele emaphethelweni nehlelo lethu namhla ngicela ngibonge ke sivakashi sethu namhla ngekuba ngesikhathi sakhe. Ngisazabuka kanye nani ngebekunene kuba nathi kuze kube ngimanje. Sihlangane futhi ngesikhathi lesitako lapho ke sitabe silethela ke lenye ke indzaba lethenza wena nemalungelo akho njengemthengi. From me Simpiwe Ngcongwane and the rest of the team, sithi nisale kahle and do have a great week ahead. Cheers.